Hello and welcome to the podcast of fringeartculture.com. This podcast aims to enrich community by focusing on local art and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Grant and this is Alison.
Hi, how you going?
Welcome to episode 2.
On this podcast, we'll be exploring in more depth the topics raised and artists featured on the blog during the month.
We'd love to hear from you and get feedback on how we're going. We want this to be a community built by the community, for the community. We will be chatting to artists, authors and musicians, sharing with you the best of what we can find in our local community, including author readings, flash interviews with musicians and sets from amateur comedians. We will catch you up on what's been happening and what's coming up in the local area. All this available on demand when it's convenient for you via the blog or your podcast provider of choice. This month, we've delved into cultural diversity and what that means for us.
We featured work from artists such as Lakshmi Gidaluru, who is influenced greatly by her Indian heritage, Nereus Toole, a Papua New Guinean digital artist who portrays aspects of his varied tribal culture in PNG, and Miri, a contemporary Aboriginal artist who has devoted her life to using her work to raise universal issues that come out of her cultural works. We've also looked at one of Sean Tan's most famous novels, The Arrival, where he uses surreal and fantastical elements to portray a sense of confusion and alienation that immigrants feel in other cultures. Artists and creatives have a valuable role in engaging people and raising awareness around cultural issues, but why should we care about the different cultures around us? To answer that today, we're going to look at what culture is and what's happening with it around the world.
As of 2009, there were nearly 7,000 languages in the world. Many of these are indigenous languages with only a few remaining speakers left. When those remaining people die, not only does the entire language die, but often much of the original culture dies with them. In fact, it is anticipated that within the lifetime of our children, the next 80 years or so, we'll lose about half the languages that exist today. Since colonisation, we've lost almost 2/3 of the Aboriginal languages that existed on this continent alone.
Yeah, and each of the different languages has ideas and words that don't often translate well into other languages. These words hold significant meaning unique to that culture, connections and concepts with lots of embedded history. If these cultures are lost, we lose those unique concepts and perspectives.
A little info fact, I was listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast, and he is a big fan of Japanese culture. And a little interesting quirk of language, the two letters that are used, the one for hand and one for paper, in Japanese mean a handwritten letter. But in Chinese, those same two symbols, hand, paper, mean toilet paper. So in Japanese, it means a nice handwritten letter, and in Chinese, it means toilet paper.
You can kind of see the similarities.
Yeah, but it does. I'd hate to get some toilet paper.
Maybe you're writing with your bottom.
Well, it probably comes from using your hand to wipe your bottom.
Yeah.
But then using paper over your hand to wipe your bottom. So that's probably where the hand paper comes from.
So you can see cultural meanings overlay every part of our lives. They often provide definitions, expectations about stages of our lives, influence our attitudes towards work, religion, socialization and family, manners and habits of thought. Our cultures are the institutions in which we live.
Yeah, they give a context and a framework for, sometimes what we mean by truth as well.
Yeah. And learning about cultures around us, we're enriching our lives with more perspectives, and this leads us to a deeper understanding of our own lives and more appreciation and empathy for those around us. Because culture isn't static, it's not fixed. It must be understood that our cultures influence each other. So, over time, our cultures have morphed by influences. It belongs to the people, and each of us has a responsibility to be open about our cultures, I think.
In Australia, there are two main narratives regarding diversity and assimilation. On one hand, there's the conversation regarding Indigenous cultures around the world, such as the Australian Aboriginal culture, who had to assimilate to the invading colonial culture in order to survive. Whereas most migrants and refugees choosing to travel here from other countries do so with an open mind. For the most part, they want to assimilate, learn, and be influenced by the people here without abandoning wholesale who they are and where they came from. And our responsibilities to these cultures is slightly different. Indigenous cultures are tied into this place, this country. Despite their minority, they have the right to choose and make decisions about their culture.
Which at this point, particularly in federal politics, I think is mostly at a consultative level due to their minority.
They lack the power to act with sovereignty over the fate of their unique culture. Recognised worldwide as one of the longest continuous cultures on Earth, dating back 60,000 years. Nothing displays the lack of understanding of this government more than a recent decision not to ban people from climbing arguably the most sacred site in Aboriginal culture, Uluru. Minister Greg Hunt believes that allowing people to climb Uluru is important for tourism, and Adam Giles, NT Minister for Tourism, agrees. This decision not only ignores the significance of this place, but the message from traditional owners placed at the base of Uluru shows that there is an even greater opportunity to share a rich cultural experience with tourists. It reads, "We, the Anungu traditional owners, have this to say. Uluru is sacred in our culture. It is a place of great knowledge. Under our traditional law, climbing is not permitted. This is our home. Please don't climb. We invite you to walk around the base and discover a deeper understanding of this place."
I guess it gets really hard there because you'd think that they'd want to celebrate the culture itself and make it the selling point. Come and enrich your lives and experience it in Australia. But the nature of Aboriginal culture is quite secretive. So it's, in a way, knowledge has to be earned but through initiation and everything within their culture. So I guess it gets kind of hard from an outsider in to kind of penetrate that a little bit.
Yeah, well, even between groups, they held certain secrets in very, very closely, because a lot of them are very spiritual. They go back to the dreaming. So the practices they have between their groups are actually, there's probably some medicine practices that they held quite important, but also
I guess it's to do with the landscape as well.
Yeah, well, it's stories and etymological myths about how different parts of landscape became how they were, but even their initiation rituals are even secretive, and they hold closely that fact because they are different depending on where you go.
Yeah, well, the whole thing of behind the Aboriginal art movement and how they were trying to get artists from the desert and assimilate them and get them to share their culture through their art. They were sharing stories about their initiations and all the sacred symbols and all that kind of stuff. But in those ceremonies, in the sand, that they would actually get covered over and washed out, and therefore the next people who weren't allowed to look at it wouldn't actually get to see it. But that's why they started the dots. So that when they actually came through and started doing artwork on a more permanent form that couldn't be, the soil couldn't be rubbed over again,
Yep.
The dots were there to camouflage things.
Oh, okay. So there's hidden meaning in the dot paintings done by
well, obviously that's morphed over time.
Were initiated into the secret.
I guess there'd be only a certain amount of people who would get, the meaning they required out of those paintings in the beginning.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So on the flip side to this, in 1996, the Parliament of New South Wales, based in Sydney, passed legislation to enable the return of ownership of several national parks to their traditional Aboriginal owners. Like earlier federal Australian legislation governing the Northern Territory, the Aboriginal owners were to lease back their lands to the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service and co-manage the land using a board which has a majority of traditional owners in a style known as joint management. The legislation provides an annual rental fee paid by the New South Wales government, which will provide extra funding to ensure the lands are managed to meet Aboriginal community interests. Now, this came off a website called culturalsurvival.org. So that that portion there just explains what happened. I think after that decision was made to hand over the land back to the traditional owners, about 12 months or a little bit further down the track, they actually held like a standoff or like a barricaded areas off or something, and the New South Wales Premier had to come in and negotiate or talk at the Aboriginal elders at that time, I think, who were managing the park, said, well, these areas in this park are sacred. We don't want the public to go anywhere near them. And we also want all the rangers, Indigenous or not, to have like a training done so that they understood what was significant about these parts of the land, so that they could transfer that knowledge into the public without misinformation. With regards to migrant and refugees, educational programs about their culture or background should be made available to us, from kinder-age children right through to senior high school and adulthood. At the moment, our conventional schooling system crowds out other cultures, and there is too little on offer around here for adults seeking other cultural experiences. This imbalance of power in government, in society and education disadvantage our diverse community at the moment, and it is no wonder that Logan suffers from misunderstanding and prejudice.
Yeah, we need to have more conversations about diversity and inclusion, with family and friends. We need to push ourselves to be more inclusive. We watched a TED Talk recently where the speaker, Sarah Salguero, she asked the audience to close their eyes and think about a dinner party that they were preparing to host. In the example, she asked the audience to picture each guest as they were being invited through the door to be welcomed. Then she asked them to honestly think how many of those people were from different cultures than their own. She makes a valid point when you realize that most of the people that we extend our friendship to have similar backgrounds. In fact, I think I read somewhere that people's friendship groups actually tend to be more closely genetically similar to them than the rest of the community. So
That's weird.
whether that's just because of things you pick up from facial features, or
Do we have an inherent ability to kind of assume that someone who's very much like us is going to have lots in common with us, and therefore we just reach out to them just
like a kind of kin selection, I guess, which is quite interesting. There's lots around inherent biases and stuff like that, and stuff that you don't even know that you have. There's some interesting tests, actually. There's like online surveys that you can do to test for your implicit biases. What they do there is they match up either different words with pictures of people's faces. So they'll put good with someone like an African American face. Now, it was designed to be done in America, and you can go on the website, and we'll add it into the show links if you're interested. And you can actually, all the people that have done it. Obviously, it's very self-selected because it's just an internet survey.
Yeah.
So mostly the people that went and found it were young adults, and there was a fairly strong pattern of inherent bias, and what it indicates might be even softer, a less amount of inherent bias in the community than actually exists because of the people that chose to do the survey. But they use a timing to see how long it takes you to work past your bias to answer the question.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, that's the method they use, and they go through all of that on the thing and kind of tell you, what might be the flaws and stuff. But it's pretty well known that, if you're walking down the street and you see someone who you connect things in your mind to, either from social conditioning or whatever, to be a little bit afraid of, or that they're in the out group,
Yeah.
you'll put your back up. You'll be on guard. But there's there's no way for you to know whether that person is. It's just the inherent things in
Well,
people.
we have so much social conditioning, I think. Well, you look at mass media and their the cover of the asylum seekers and everything that's happened in Nauru and our policy in Australia to turn back the boats and all that kind of stuff, and the fear mongering that goes on with terrorism, you know, all the terror attacks and stuff all across the world. And we just, I guess a lot of people don't even realise that they're being influenced by that.
Yeah, definitely. So the point she makes is that much more important in that case, that we need to extend ourselves a little bit more. We need to put some energy back into the system, and being personally responsible to include people that are outside our normal social sphere and make them feel welcome too.
Which I find, it's a little bit difficult for, I guess, myself, because I don't necessarily mingle in that way, like, because I'm just not exposed to the demographic like some people are.
Yeah, out here in the burbs.
Well, it depends. It depends. Like, if you went into Woodridge and you worked in Woodridge, or, you know, you lived in Woodridge, and you probably would, you know, in areas around there, Kingston and that kind of stuff, where the diversity is a little bit more
diverse.
Yeah, well, it's a lot more in your face too, because, you know, where we are here, there's not really much around, you know, not in your face like it is there. But for that, like, you'd have to go and seek out something. But it raises an interesting question, and if anyone else out there can answer this, is that, do you do anything that prevents you, in your current circumstances, from mingling, or is there something that you think you could change, or, you know, I don't know what you do. Maybe you work somewhere that, you know, you could kind of.
Yeah, how hard do you find it to push past those preconditioned responses to people who are different?
Because workplace and social life and church groups and all that kind of stuff all have an influence on who you mingle with and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So because the interactions that we have will also breed awareness and empathy for different cultures. So I think we really do need to do that. Really push ourselves. Let's challenge each other.
Yeah. This also brings up the topic of race and the notion of being colourblind. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there was a movement, particularly in the US over the last few decades, where race became something that we shouldn't acknowledge. So I guess because of their history with African Americans. But the idea was that if you acknowledged someone who had different skin colour to you, then you were acknowledging their differences and perhaps all of the negative history and the baggage that came with that. There were a couple of problems with this idea. The first, I guess, is that we shouldn't forget the history of discrimination and slavery and displacement and torture and massacres and everything that occurred as the varied cultures clashed. And, you know, what we really should be doing is recognising and learning from those experiences. Just as we've learnt that, you know, the world wars should be avoided at all costs. And these were largely spurred by disagreements between race and cultures anyway. It makes sense, obviously, that, you know, we need to learn from those experiences. As countries living in a global society, we also need to do that on a you know, more, you know, micro level, if that makes sense. The second is that if we teach our children to avoid acknowledging our other races and cultures, then we are sending a message to them that there is something wrong with that, or something that we shouldn't talk about. And this only leads to a new generation of young people who grow up being, you know, disconnected or afraid of each other.
Yeah, I don't know whether we had the same issues in Australia as they had in America, but seriously, it was only in the 1960s that they abolished segregation in the South. And that was all, I think it was called the Jim Crow laws.
Oh, well, when did Aboriginal, Indigenous Australians become more than flora and fauna?
Yeah, well, constitutionally, they still are. Because that's why everyone's talking about the constitutional amendment. Because I think like there has been bills passed through Parliament and stuff, saying that they can vote and like giving them rights and stuff.
Yeah.
But in the Constitution, there's no recognition of them, the traditional owners. So I think that's, you know, I know that's on the cards for something that's going to happen in the next few years, and I think we all need to be.
Not that I don't think they want it. They
well,
want a
there's
treaty
there's a
instead.
couple of different ways of thinking about it. But I think we need to think positively about it. We need to move forward and work in a consultative way with them, rather than just saying, "Oh yeah, well, us white people, we recognise you as the traditional owners in our document."
Yeah, that article you shared the other day about Anzac Day and how
Yeah.
that was really interesting. I read that.
In case
Basic,
you didn't catch it on
yeah.
I put it on the. Oh, was that just on mine? I didn't put it on the Fringe one, did I?
No, you didn't. You put it on yours. But it basically examined the idea that, why are we still recognising Anzacs? It's been 100 years plus. We understand what they did.
Yeah, get over it.
Yeah. But really, all he really did was change a few words in a sentence that was about Aboriginal culture. Why are we still saying sorry?
It was about Sorry Day
Yeah.
and why we still need to talk about it. Haven't we said sorry? Well, that's not the point.
No, it's definitely not.
And I think he put it real well. We can link to it in the bottom of the show notes, or we can throw it up on the Facebook page for Fringe. What he was basically doing is using the idea of, like you said, of people kind of palming off Anzac Day to say, well, that's, we welcome back the soldiers. We said sorry to the veterans from Vietnam for calling them rapists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's all done. We don't need to talk about it anymore.
Maybe at the
And
same
then
time.
switch that over to talk about the saying sorry to the stolen generation.
At the same time, they also mentioned that we don't actually acknowledge the black Australians that went across
Yeah.
in the same way at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, well, the fact that
They have
the
a separate
first
kind of
time-
celebration even. A separate Remembrance Day. It's not included in our normal Anzac service. I mean, to an extent it kind of is these days, but not in, you shouldn't need to have a separate, day for it. Yeah. I think it all should just be all inclusive on one day.
Yeah, so what the article also went into, and another link off that article that was really good, kind of went into the fact that the first time that Aboriginals were treated with the same level of respect as, white Anglo-Saxon Australians was in the trenches and in war, when they were putting their life on the line for this country. Yeah. And then they came back to segregation.
Got kicked in the face, basically.
Yeah, like even on Anzac Day, they weren't allowed in the pubs to drink. They would have to be handed a beer out through the window.
Yeah.
And that's just crazy to even think about that.
Yeah. We really should aim to move on and find respect for the other cultures alongside us, particularly the Indigenous one. There is a fantastic series of books, though, edited by a lady called Lynn White. The series is called Through My Eyes. It's 6 character-driven books from the perspectives of children and teens living in war-torn countries. So the stories themselves are fictional, but based on rigorously researched situations by people who have often had first-hand experience in these countries or with refugee children. It is a very powerful series. And it is designed to give 11 to 13-year-olds an understanding, but I would recommend adults everywhere read it as well. Or, anywhere who, I had no idea. You kind of have, you're exposed to some of the media regards to it, and some of this, this one in particular went through some of the Muslim traditions and, arranged marriages and that kind of stuff. But, you don't really get the full effect until you read it. It's just amazing. So they're extremely well written, and I'll do a reading for you now. There are 2 parts of the book so you can get an idea of what they're like. Chapter 1. The early sun was shining as Shahana skipped down the village bazaar. Her beloved big brother Irfan was taking her to the tent school. Their cement school had never been rebuilt after the earthquake. Shahana had on her blue kameez and white shalwar. She was 9, and she had just learned how to iron her school uniform. Today would be exciting. She had 2 new apples in her backpack, one for herself and one for Aisha, her friend from the next class. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, called Mr. Perverse from his shop with the new glass windows. Wah, alaikum alasam, and upon you be peace, Irfan responded. They stopped by the door and Mr. Pervase gave each of them a toffee. He pinched Shahana on the cheek. What an angel, he said. Just as Irfan drew her away towards the road, there was a thump from an RPG. Then the shelling started. Mr. Pervase's new windows burst like a bubble. Glass sprayed all over the road and Irfan pushed Shahana to the ground, dropping to cover her. Shahana wakes up, gasping. She hasn't dreamed this dream for a long time. Dreams are never true, she reminds herself. But she couldn't stop the memory, can't stop her heart racing, as if a black leopard is chasing her. It wasn't just Irfan. Her mother was there too, and her little brother, Tanvir, who has hated loud noises ever since that day. Ever since, his breathing has been worse, as though something sharp stuck in his chest. The banging of the guns went on forever. She could see Tanvir screaming in her mother's arms, even though she couldn't hear him, and when the gunfire stopped, Irfan didn't get up, nor did her mother. It was her father who found Shahana and Tanvir. He wept as he took them to Nanaji, her mother's father, who lived in the forest. Their own wooden house in the village had burned with the gunfire. Shahana never went back to school after that. Instead, she did all her mother's jobs and looked after Tanvir. She wishes she could study again, but there was no school in the village now, and besides, she can't make money at school. Shahana can still hear the gunfire. Is it following into her waking hours now too? Her heart is still beating wildly. She will feel dizzy next. She takes a deep breath to slow the thumping. Tanvir wakes with a cry. They sleep in the same sharp wire string bed, and she puts her arm around him. Shut, quiet, it will stop soon. She hopes it will, for she realizes now that the gunfire is real. It is coming from down near the Big Neelam River, where the line of control runs along the border between Azad Kashmir and Jammu and Kashmir. A dog howls. See, she says, the soldiers are just fighting the dogs away. Frightened. See, she says, the soldiers. See, she says, the soldiers are just frightening the dogs away. But Shahana isn't so sure. There is supposed to be ceasefire in the line of control. Indian soldiers patrol the electric fence to stop militants infiltrating their side of Kashmir, and Pakistani soldiers patrol it to keep an eye on Indian soldiers, but both sides take shots at each other across the high razor wire. Pity anyone who gets in their way. She takes more slow breaths to steady herself and shuts her mind against the thought. It is too much for one night. Tanvir takes slow, shallow little breaths. When he cries, he finds it hard to breathe. Tomorrow we will go to the village. Shahana strokes his hair away from his temples and feels his breathing ease. She covers him with a cotton-filled quilt and lies down facing him, even though she can't see him. In his hand, she can feel the tiny carved camel Nanaji made for him. It has a separate calf inside, yet Nanaji carved it out of one piece of wood. It rattles as Tanvir moves his arm under the quilt. Tanvir is only 9 and looks younger. He can't milk the goat yet, but at least he can collect wood for the forest for their cooking fire. Even then, she has to fight an urge to go with him. He tends to wander and forget where he is. What if he gets lost or falls in the river? He is the only family she has left. She knows she loves him, but it is still so difficult to feel like her mother. Sometimes Shahana feels like a legendary stone princess who was so beautiful that 2 princes wanted to marry her. She prayed that they would all be turned to stone so the princes wouldn't kill each other. When Shahana's heart isn't pounding, it is cold like stone. Chapter 27. Mr. Nadir takes Shahana into a room Tanvir emerged from. The loom sits in the far corner near a high window, with 3 boys even younger than Tanvir tying knots and cutting wool, their curved knives a blur. The boys don't look up even as she walks through, their hands flying like little birds. A young man with a pattern in his hand stands behind the boys, checking their work. Shahana is taken into a smaller room. There are mattresses piled along the wall, but there is no window. This is where the boys sleep. You can sleep here too, Mr. Nadir says. It will only be a few days while I organise the marriage. His hesitation and grin when he says marriage aren't lost on Shahana. There is a bucket of water and another bucket with a lota, a plastic jug, beside it to wash with. She doesn't dare go outside to relieve herself during the first day, for she will have to pass the young man supervising the boys. Instead, she uses the bucket in the room and empties it after the man has gone home. That evening, the boys eat their vegetable curry and roti. They are so tired they fall onto the mattresses Shahana has put out for them. Fortunately, there is enough roti and curry for her too. One boy, Hanif, wakes up crying that first night. He must only be 6 years old. She cuddles him as if he is Tanvir. I wish my Ami was here, he says between gulps. Shahana doesn't like to ask about her in case she is dead, so she just rocks him. Is your father at home? She asks instead. The boy nods into her shawl. Abu was injured in the fighting. He lost his job and doesn't have the money to look after me. Shahana can imagine how it happened. Maybe the man secured a loan from Mr. Nadir and then couldn't repay it. No doubt he was forced to give up his son, just as she has given up her freedom. The boy speaks again. When Abu finds a job again, he will take me home. Shahana doesn't say anything. Who has ever earned enough money to buy a child out of bonded labour? Hanif will have to wait until he has worked enough to pay for it himself. That could take 20 years. Shahana counts the hours and the days. She has an embroidery square in her pocket, a needle and some thread, but she soon finishes it. She sweeps the room, but mostly sits on top of the mattresses, wondering what Tanvir and Zahid are doing. She feels a pang when she thinks of Aisha. She'll be wondering where she is. On the third afternoon, Mr. Nadir brings in clothes for her. Wash and put these on tonight. There is a long embroidered skirt with a kurta, a long shirt and a long shirt to match. They are red and gold, a bride's clothes. They sparkle even in the low light of the room. I am sorry there is no wedding week for you. He doesn't look sorry at all. Shahana knows he is only thinking of the money he will get. See what you can do with this. He gives her soap, shampoo and a hairbrush, makeup and clips for her hair, all things from his shop. I suppose you've never used makeup before, he says, while hanging a mirror on the wall. It is true, Shahana has never worn makeup, but her mother did. If she was alive, she'd be showing Shahana how to do those small things that women do, and this marriage wouldn't be happening at all. Only the thought of Tanvir being safe brings her some peace of mind. As Mr. Nadir leaves her to wash and dress, she tries to close her mind against the thoughts of what might have been. This is the path she has been forced to take, and she will have to learn to live with it. If you want to have a look at all the books in the series, what you can do is go through to this website. It's throughmyeyesbooks.com.au. It lists all the books there. It has blurb about all of them. You can go, there's even teachers' notes and stuff, so that because they're obviously designed to be looked at in schools. But yeah, I'm going to try and get a few of these copies for our girls at home so that they can read them as well.
Another great way of getting involved in culture around us is to look for cultural events happening nearby. There are a couple nearby right now. The Indigenous exhibition at the Logan Art Gallery right now, called My Country, I Still Call Australia Home, Contemporary Art from Black Queensland, is going until the 21st of May.
Yeah, and Finding Home, it's a refugee and asylum seekers art exhibition, is on from the 27th of May to the 2nd of July. So at the end of the month. Coming up at the Logan Central Library is a Colourfest film screening. It's World Day for Cultural Diversity on Saturday the 21st. It's at 2 p.m.
You can check out the Yugambeh Totem display at Jimboomba Library in May.
The Yugambeh Museum obviously is just down at the Beenleigh near the historical village, kind of on the other side.
Behind Mitre 10 Mega.
Yeah, and they're obviously responsible for a lot of the development in the local languages. So the Yugambeh is I think the language group or the main language group that...
From here all the way down to
the
Currumbin?
I think it's just north of the Tweed River.
Okay.
Yeah. And they also have an ancestors display throughout June in the Beenleigh Library as well.
There are talks about constitutional recognition, which we mentioned just before, and lots about Refugee Week in the library too. Grab a copy of a program anytime at the library or the art gallery.
And the Yugambeh Mobo Festival is on at Somerset College on Sunday the 29th of May too.
Thanks for being with us, and as a reminder, leave your comments about this episode on the blog, Twitter, or Facebook. Share the podcast by sharing the Twitter or Facebook post for this episode, and if you like what we're doing and you want to be involved, hit us up on the contact page.
I'm going to leave you with this quote from Catherine Ndungu. She says this in her TED Talk, which was really good. I'll put a link on there. But she says, music and dance are essential ingredients for a happy life, and through this, people from all backgrounds can reach across their differences and find joyful common ground.
Thanks. See you next time.